I am a bitless instructor, riding instructor and horse trainer. I've been specialising in bitless riding horses for about 10 years now. And I'm really into natural horsemanship too. And I'd like to talk today, rather than talking about the nuts and bolts of it, a little bit more about the overall philosophy and within the context of my own story. So I started completely naturally. When I was a kid, I didn't have my own horse. I was a horse mad kid. And no horses is not good. So there was the person that lived next door had a horse in their paddock. And when I was about 7, 8 years old, for a number of years, I used to climb out my bedroom window. I'd wait for everyone to go quiet, and then I'd open the window, climb out the window, go through the fences, go to the next door's property and visit this horse. And that progressed to me jumping up on that horse, and I used to lay there for hours at night just looking at the stars and smelling her and just feeling her moving and the sound of her munching the grass, just that whole, just being with the horse, with nothing. No halter, no rope, no saddle, no bridle, no nothing, just sitting on the horse and just being with her and feeling horse. And that's where I started. And then I went astray. The guy that owned that horse, he saw me one day and he said, "Oh, there's a bridle and a saddle in the shed," and just kept walking. And I went, "Oh my God, he's seen me, he knows what I'm doing." But that was his way of giving me permission. So I went and got the bridle and saddle and started riding that horse. Somebody else heard about me, they gave me a horse. Next thing I know, I'm an apprentice under a steeplechasing guy, and he was using me to train his steeplechasers. He got me into jumping, and he was also into hunting, so I'd go off hunting. And we were using some pretty serious equipment on those horses. We were full pelt gallop, jumping everything. So yeah, it was some pretty serious things in their mouth. I did show jumping for a number of years, and that was sort of what I did. I was this crazy kid that just wanted to go full pelt gallop, jumping everything. Then life moved on, lived overseas, lived in cities, stuff like that, had kids, moved back to the country and got horses. And they, as they grew up on horses, being led around in the bush, and we just hung out with horses, had a lot of fun. And then they wanted to do pony club. Now, I'd never had the chance to do that when I was a kid, so I was like, yeah, let's do pony club. So we went off to pony club and everything changed. The first pony club we went to, my daughter's little Palomino wasn't moving, and the instructor said, "Well, you've got to wear spurs." We were like, "We don't wear spurs with Goldie." But we sort of went along with it, and so we wore spurs, and then, a few more weeks, you've got to have a whip. You've got to use a more serious bit. I trained as a pony club instructor, so I started teaching the kids at pony club, and they had something that we thought we wanted. So we went along with that. I started working for a dressage trainer. He was starting horses and training performance horses, and I was working for him, having a lesson with him every day, doing traditional classical English style riding, and also having dressage lessons with a German dressage instructor who was very high up. And I found my beautiful horse. I had a pelham on him, and I had spurs, and I had whips, and then we were using market harbors, and then I had a chambon, and then I had this and I had that. I had all this hardware I was putting on my horses, because I wanted this dream. I wanted this thing that it looked like they had. At the same time, I started going to uni, so I started doing an equine science degree. And again, I was doing it because I loved horses and I'm a scientist. That's my way of thinking. And worked my way through the science degree. By the time I got to it, it took me 6 years to finish my degree. I did it part-time. I realised that I was fully trained in something that I never wanted to do. Again, it's a field where you basically experiment on horses, and you cut up cadavers. And there's a lot of other stuff going on as well, but they were two things that I just realised in the long term I wouldn't be able to do. Concurrently with that, I was training with the Equestrian Federation of Australia to become a qualified riding coach, and I was working my way through that, and the same thing happened. I found myself using all this really intense hardware on my horses, and the things I had to do to go through the assessments to become a qualified riding coach. So I went to a particular level and got some of my certification, and then things changed because I went completely bitless. I've turned around and I'd spent all these years becoming very qualified and getting lots and lots of experience doing things that I realised I didn't want to do. It was a bit of a quandary. I finished my degree, and a friend and I went to Equitana in Melbourne, and she was buying a bitless bridle. And I didn't really know much about them, but I thought, yeah, I'll get one too, you know, that was the big adventure. Let's go to Katana and come home with a bitless bridle. And so I went home with my first bitless bridle. Carlos de Bernaberry, some people might have heard of him, he's a gorgeous guy down in Victoria. He was doing a demo there and he was using the cross-under style of bitless bridle, which is designed by Dr. Cook. So because there's a few different designs. So I bought one of them because he was saying, yeah, this is cool. And I'm really glad I did. Anyway, so I got home with my new bitless bridle and started. At the time I was working as a trail guide for a company. We had about 65 horses and I had about 6 different horses that I used as my guide horses, plus I was giving riding lessons there and running camps, eventing camps and stuff. So there's a lot of and I had my own horses. I had a warm blood stallion, his mares and my riding herds. A lot of horses, probably 100 horses in constant contact every week at that stage. I was really into it. So I come back with my bitless bridle. I had a lot of different horses to try it on. I tried it on my own horses, and Darcy, who I'd been doing the dressage, he was my main dressage horse, been doing most of my lessons with him. And while he was a fabulous horse, he never really got as soft as we wanted. In the canter particularly, he would stiffen through his neck. And so, you know, it was an ongoing thing that we were working on. I was working on with my instructors. He'd had the bitless bridle on probably 3-4 times, and I took him down the paddock and popped him into a canter circle, and it's the first time I'd cantered him in the bitless bridle because I took it fairly slowly. This is a new piece of gear for me. I didn't really know what was going to happen, and I got the softest forward, bouncy, beautiful, flowing canter I've ever had out of this horse. And I'd been doing dressage training with this horse for years. I was just like, oh my God. He was in full collection but holding it himself, and soft and flowing, and there wasn't a bit of tense muscle anywhere in his body. And I started crying, and there I am cantering around crying, the tears were going, I'm sorry Darcy, I'm sorry, I didn't know, you know. I had this really big moment that was a big crossroads for me. I just went, all right, I've been doing something wrong. I'd spent years and years training to get where I was, and something was just saying to me, hang on. I knew inside me, in my heart, that what I was doing wasn't working for me, but I just didn't know what else to do. So that was really good. The trail place where I was working, we had a couple of brumbies there, green-broke brumbies, and I was having problems with them. They were very reactive. They were jumping. I take people out and I'm in charge. So I might have 10, sometimes 15. We weren't meant to go that high, but usually 10 in the group, and I'd be in charge of all of those people, and there could be beginners and all sorts of horses and mixed riding levels there, and I'd be riding one of these brumbies and they'd react to something and jump all over the place, and then I'd correct them, and because I had a bit in their mouth, the correction had to be quite severe because I have to be in control of my horse all the time because I'm the guide. And then they would be all hot and crazy in the head because I've given them a serious correction and they felt pain. So I went, right, I'm going to do it. And luckily my employer was cool with it. So I transitioned these brumbies into the bitless bridle and started guiding on them. And they still jumped. They still reacted to things in the environment. I still gave them a really strong correction because I had to have 100% control. And then we were calm and off we go again. It was like they instantly dropped. They just didn't get upset. They just didn't go hot in the brain. They didn't lose it. They just stayed calm. I could do a full strong correction and still have a calm horse. That was my second, whoa moment. So, okay, maybe I like this. The third thing that happened, that this was the final cruncher, and this is the one that really put me totally on my new direction, and I really did drop everything I'd done up until this point when this happened. I was out on I was on a trail, and I was riding one of the thoroughbreds. We had a couple of thoroughbreds there straight off the track. They'd been in there for a while, but they had raced. And there was a man there, and he was a very good rider. He was on a thoroughbred as well. I had the bitless bridle on mine, and we were out in the bush, and they decided to go for a little run, and they bolted, which is not good. It's not good. It shouldn't really happen in that situation, but it did happen on this day. And I pulled up. I pulled my horse up with my female muscles in the bitless bridle before this man with the bit could stop his horse. And I was just like, whoa, okay, now it's been tested. For me, that was the ultimate test. Is it safe? Because that's what, when we grow up as horse people, I don't know how long you people have been with horses, but I know that I was indoctrinated when I was a child. You cannot control a horse without a bit in its mouth. It's impossible. You need that for your safety. It's really unsafe to ride a horse without a bit, and I believed it 100%. So for me to turn around and go, okay, I'm not going to die, I'm not going to die. I can actually do this. I can actually ride a horse without a bit in its mouth and actually be safer. So then, in being a scientist that I am, I decided to research. Dr. Cook, who designed these bridles, he's a vet, and he'd done a number of research projects, and because he's a vet, he'd written up all these white papers. So there are a lot of scientific papers, and luckily, I could read them because I was a scientist by then. And he came up with some amazing things. There's a lot. I've got a folder here, so if anyone wants to come and get some information sheets, that's all free. You just help yourself after the talk. But he did a lot of things. You can Google him, and there's a lot of things on the papers he did and the research he did online. Few of the things that he did was that he did research into the actual bit and what does it do. So what he found was that the bit, it puts pressure on three main parts of the mouth, and this is every bit. So sometimes people say, oh, I only use the snaffle, I only use the soft bit, I only use the French snaffle, it's all really soft, it's really nice on the horse. What he found was it doesn't really matter, a bit is a bit, it's a piece of metal in a horse's mouth, and it puts pressure on these three main parts, being the lips, the tongue and the bars. So the tongue is very, very sensitive, and putting pressure on that definitely creates pain, there's no doubt about it. Dr. McGreevy, he's an equine behaviourist, Australian equine behaviourist. He's recently done a whole heap of research this on, well, he's proven it. He's actually scientifically proven it with the cortisol release, the pain that's caused by the bit. So, it puts pressure on the tongue, and it can actually lacerate the tongue. I've got some pictures, lovely pictures there of lacerated tongues. It can happen. I had a racehorse guy from Victoria last year. He came to visit me, who was travelling through, and bought a bitless bridle because he'd witnessed a young horse in a rearing bit. Somebody had been rough with it, and it actually lacerated its tongue completely, almost completely severed. They had to get the vet out and remove the remainder of the tongue, and then I think they ended up putting him down. It literally cut the rearing bit's really narrow, literally cut his tongue in two. So the tongue, it definitely is impacted by the bit. The lips. So the lips are quite sensitive at the side, and they can crack. When I go around to work with horses, especially a lot of the problem horses that people are wanting to transition into a bitless bridle, when I look at them and I actually look at their mouth, I will see scarring. And so I know that there's been splits in the side of the mouth. And I also know, I'm not going to drop any names, but a local trainer here who trains horses deliberately tightens it up when he's mouthing them and starting them to split the side of the mouth so that it's super sensitive, so that the horse becomes very responsive to the rein aid, so they respect the bit. And that's common practice in the traditional way of starting horses. So a lot of pain associated with pressure on the corners of the lips. But they're not even the worst ones. The worst one's the bars. So on the bottom jaw, you've got the mandible. That's a piece of bone, and it's pointy like that, like a little mountain. And so we sit the bit on that. Over that is fleshy mucous membrane. It's about 1 to 2 millimetres thick, and that's it. And it's wet, and it's really thin, and it's really soft. So basically, when the pressure, and we put the bit in there where there's that gap, so it actually sits on the bars. So when that metal has an action on those bars, there is an amount of trauma that occurs. When bone is traumatised, it remodels. This is a standard physiological thing that happens with all animals, ourselves included. So that remodels. Horses are very good at overhealing. You're probably all aware how you've got to be really careful of proud flesh and things like that with horses because they overheal. So when a horse becomes traumatised on these bars, the bone remodels and it creates these little spurs. They're called bone spurs. Dr. Cook looked at a number of cadavers and he found that 60% of domestic horses had evidence of bone spurs. When he looked at feral skulls, 0. So they're directly created by what we as humans do when we're riding the horses. So then now you've got this sharp bone and it's got little spiky bits coming off it, so you can imagine the pain. Right? So that's what he found with the bit. He also found that when you remove the bit, he did an experiment with 440 horses and he gave the riders a questionnaire, then they took the bit away and did the same test the next day and re-rode it with the bitless bridle and did the same questionnaire. He identified 50 problems that were occurring from the use of the bit, 60% of them were behavioural, and there were also locomotive and respiratory problems as well. So yeah, he's done a lot of research into actually what the bit does, and then that's why he designed this. So I've been using these for about 10 years now, and I have seen so many different types of horses transition into them beautifully. And we were talking earlier about what sort of people would you want to use this. Like, do you need a really, really experienced horse? Do you need a really, really experienced horse, people like trainer level, or can just anyone use them? And the thing is with these that they're really, really good with green breaks, so young horses. They're really good for starting horses. They're really good for children and inexperienced riders because they don't have the motor control or their sensitivity or understanding in their arms really to be using a bit in the first place. And there's no way they're going to be using a bit without hurting the horse. We know that. We know what happens to ponies. Anyone that's been around ponies that's been ridden by children for a while knows what happens to them. So this is a way of alleviating the pain and giving yourself a happy horse. Now, I'm going to go back to being a scientist now. So the physiological things that actually happen. When we use a bit, spurs, whips, and all those other things that I used to use, and some of us do, what happens is that a hormone called cortisol is released. Now this is a fight or flight hormone, and it's a stress hormone, and it's released in response to pain. Most of our traditional horse training is based on negative reinforcement. You apply a negative stimulus, something that the horse doesn't like, and then when they do what you want, you take it away. And that's most of our training. We do a little bit of other, but if you actually look at what the traditional horse training methods are, they're pretty much based on negative reinforcement. That results in the release of cortisol. Cortisol, being a fight or flight hormone, actually shuts down the part of the brain that learns. Its entire job is to get the body ready to run or fight. So you don't have, it's not that's not the time when you're going to learn some new maths or something. That's irrelevant. So that hormone actually shuts down the ability to remember. So the recall reduces. They can't remember as much, and they can't actually learn in the moment either because they're in a state of stress. And they've got the wrong hormone in their body to be in a learning headspace. So then we end up with a horse that's not learning, that's a bit hot and difficult to control. Guess what? Oh, we'll have to use some more hardware on them then. We need a stronger bit. We need more of this. We need more of that. And it just becomes a cyclic thing. It just goes around and round and round. This creates that, creates that, creates that, until in the end, the amount of hardware that can be on some horses is absolutely incredible. At the end of that, if it doesn't work, it's a bad horse and it's sent off to the knackery. I know not everyone does that. And I'm sure none of you do that or you wouldn't be sitting here. But it happens. I've worked in the industry. So that's what happens when you use pain and negative reinforcement as you're training. Now let's go to the other side. And the other thing I'm talking about today is natural horsemanship. Natural horsemanship is not natural. There is nothing natural about horsemanship. If you could just go and sit on a horse and they were happy about that, that'd be natural. The reason we have to spend so much time training them to do all these things is because it's totally unnatural. So I just want to get that up front right now. I don't know what other term to use. I've used some other terms over the years and people don't really know what I do. So I keep going back to saying natural horsemanship, but I'm very aware that I'm imposing. When I'm with a horse and doing something, I'm constantly looking for communication from the horse, and I'm appreciative of anything that comes from the horse and try to get a two-way communication going, not a domination over. Sidetracking, sorry. So back to, natural horsemanship, what happens physiologically. So now we're looking at positive reinforcement. When you train using positive reinforcement, you're looking at using praise and rewards. So praise can be good boy and a little bit of a pat or a scratch or a food treat. Most animals in the world, people use food rewards when they're training animals, and in Europe they're used with horses extensively. For some reason, in Australia, there's a bit of a taboo about using food treats when training horses. And I think it primarily comes from a misunderstanding of how to do it. So if you use a food treat to get a horse to do something, they don't learn anything at all. And in fact, you'll end up with a bargy horse that's barging into you to take the food treat. But if you give a cue, get the response you want from the horse, and then give a food treat, it's used as a reward. And that is then reinforcing the behaviour. So I think a lot of people don't understand that. That's why it's got a little bit of a bad rap. But if it's used correctly, it's absolutely